You know, when a rabbi calls, you don't say no. But when Rabbi Teldon called me the other day and asked me to speak and tell my story, I thought, I don't have a story. That's a problem. But I started thinking back and started with my childhood. And I realized it really was pretty uneventful, and thankfully so. But on the other hand, it wasn't really very Jewish. I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. I was 6 years old when my parents decided to move from the heart of the Jewish community out to Memorial, where there were very few Jews. They did schlep me to Sunday school, actually religious school because it was on Saturday, every week, which I really did not enjoy. And that was the extent of my Jewish education. When I was in high school, neither my parents nor I thought anything about what Jewish life would be on a college campus. So when I applied and was accepted, I ended up at a university where I was one of 4 freshman Jewish women, very alone. When I graduated, and maybe because of where I graduated from, I didn't think about going to Israel like many people did in the early 70s. Instead, I went to Appalachia, right? To help all the poor people in Appalachia. And I worked on various healthcare, environmental, and economic development projects. So, here I am. I'm in my 20s. I'm starting to date. I'm not dating Jewish men, right? And if you think about it, as I thought about it, I suddenly realized I was the poster child for everything that was wrong with post-war Jewish America. And if you ask my friend Susie Brown, who knew me when I was 6 and knew me when I was 20 and still knows me now, if you had asked her when I was in my 20s, would I be a part of the Jewish community? She would have said, no way. So it changed in my life. Well, first of all, I have to step back and say, I wasn't embarrassed about being Jewish. I was very proud of being Jewish. I embraced the stories of my grandparents who escaped persecution in Russia and came to Texas, all of them, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And I was particularly enamored by the story of my grandfather, Cecil Rabinowitz, who really came from a desolate life in Belarus and made quite a success of himself in Rosenberg, Texas. He, along with his older brother Abe, worked. They brought everybody over, the entire family. There were 5 brothers, 3 sisters. And by the early 1930s, they owned Rosenberg, Texas. Okay, it wasn't Houston, it wasn't Dallas, but it was Rosenberg, Texas. They owned the dry goods store. They owned the pharmacy. They owned the cotton gin. They owned herds of cattle. And they owned cotton farms, thousands and thousands of acres of cotton farms. They even owned the Pierce Arrow distributorship or whatever. Pierce Arrows were very fancy cars back then. And because they could, in the 30s, buy 5 of them at one time, they became the dealership for Rosenberg, Texas. The joke at my wedding was that Michael Ozer thought he was marrying the Rabinowitz millions, but he was marrying millions of Rabinowitzes. And so, what changed? Good question. Well, what changed was that I did marry this nice Jewish boy, Michael Ozer, not a boy at the time I married him. And we moved back to San Antonio in 1982. It was a wonderful time to be back, and we became very close with Michael's family, and I think a lot of you here knew Sid and Winnie Ozer, who were wonderful, wonderful members of this community and gave a lot of themselves. And they were an inspiration to me, and because of their involvement, in particular with Jewish Federation of San Antonio, I became very involved with the Jewish Federation of San Antonio, and through that involvement, with other organizations. And at that time, I became very aware of 2 major problems, one on a macro scale and one micro. The macro problem was that I was not the only Pat Kalmans. There were lots of Pat Kalmans around who had lost their connection to the Jewish community. And there was a real problem with Jewish continuity in this country. The micro problem that I had was that I really hadn't learned anything in that terrible religious school that I went to, and I had a real deficiency in my Jewish education. So I made it a point of trying to learn a lot more about Judaism, about our culture, our heritage, but particularly about how to be a practicing Jew. And there were a lot of people here to help me, including Rabbi Chaim Block, who's here tonight, whose Torah study I attended. And I was very welcomed into the Chabad community, and I appreciate that very much. So I have to also give credit to my father, because my father was a person who told me that when I became a professional, when I got out of law school and started my career, that I had to throw myself into community as much as I did my profession. He told me that if I didn't join a synagogue and join the JCC and support the Jewish organizations in my community, that those building blocks that make the Jewish community what it is, those building blocks would crumble, and there wouldn't be a Jewish community. Well, I felt a lot of responsibility with that admonition, and I did what he said. I got on boards. I contributed. I helped raise money. I helped start a synagogue. I worked on all kinds of projects and programs because I wanted to make sure that we had a good Jewish community, a vibrant Jewish community. At that same time, Michael and I also made a commitment that we were going to have children who were better educated, more informed, and more confident Jews than we had been growing up. And so we made sure they went to Jewish schools, went to Jewish summer camp, and by the time they graduated high school, both of them had been to Israel several times. Oh, at this point, I know you're thinking, my God, does she go on and on? I am going to end this story soon, I promise. Because you know what happened? I didn't even come close to solving that macro problem, or any problem, really. I worked hard, I tried, but those problems still exist. We still have a problem with Jewish identity in this country. But what I do feel like I accomplished is that I was able to help and raise my children in a warm, welcoming community, and that their lives and ours were enriched by being a part of San Antonio and this San Antonio Jewish community. You know, it's a long road, but the spark of my being involved with Federation and being involved in Jewish organizations here helped provide me the light that I needed to walk along that path. And I can only hope that there are some people here tonight who aren't involved who will be encouraged to become involved by my story. In some small way, maybe you can be a spark and help us maintain a vibrant Jewish community in the years to come. I'm going to conclude my talk with a quote that I found that is sort of apropos to my speech and also to this Hanukkah season. I found this quote from a rabbi in Melbourne, Australia, who said about Hanukkah, "Every individual will at some stage in their life experience their own personal Hanukkah equivalent. At some point in time, we will experience triumph over challenge and salvation from adversity. Just as we have days of celebration on a national level, so too every individual should have their own days of celebration that commemorate their personal miracles. So while we remember the Maccabees and their triumphs in the next few weeks, let us not forget all those personal miracles, big and small, that brought us to this season." Thank you.